Have you ever heard whispers of a people whose stories are as wild and untamed as the northern lands they call home? Deep in the mist-shrouded forests of Hokkaido, where the snow lingers long into spring and the wind carries secrets older than memory, the Ainu have woven legends so vivid, so strange, they feel like fragments of a dream. This isn't just folklore, it's a doorway into a world where bears speak as wise elders, where rivers remember the songs of the gods, and where every mountain holds a story waiting to be uncovered. For centuries, the Ainu people have guarded these tales, passing them down like treasures, each one a thread in the fabric of a culture that refuses to fade. Imagine standing at the edge of an ancient forest, the air thick with the scent of pine and the weight of something unseen. The Ainu didn't just live in this world, they conversed with it. To them, the land wasn't a backdrop but a living, breathing entity, and their legends reflect that intimacy. Spirits dwelled in every rock and stream, and the boundary between the human and the divine was as thin as morning mist. These aren't mere myths, they're a testament to a worldview where everything is interconnected, where respect for nature wasn't a philosophy but a way of survival. And yet, so many of these stories remain hidden, tucked away like relics in the shadows of history. Today, we're stepping into that world, 25 obscure Ainu legends, each one a glimpse into a culture that saw magic in the mundane and wonder in the wild. From shape-shifting foxes who outsmarted the gods to celestial maidens who descended on silvery threads of moonlight, these tales are more than entertainment. They're keys to understanding a people who thrived in harmony with forces modern society has long forgotten. So settle in, because this isn't just a list, it's a journey into the heart of a tradition where every story is a living thing, waiting to whisper its secrets to those willing to listen. The Ainu didn't just tell legends, they lived them, and now it's our turn to walk that path. Among the most revered and feared figures in Ainu lore is the bear god, not just an animal, but a divine messenger who walks the earth in fur and claw. To the Ainu, bears were never mere beasts. They were Kamuy, sacred spirits who chose to visit the human world in physical form. But this honor came with a grave warning: mistreat a bear and the consequences could be catastrophic. One legend tells of a village that hunted a bear without performing the proper rituals, offering no prayers or gratitude. Within days, the rivers ran black, the crops withered, and a sickness spread like shadow through the homes. The elders knew this was no coincidence. The bear god had cursed them for their arrogance. Archaeology whispers its own confirmation of these beliefs. In ancient Ainu settlements, bear skulls have been found carefully placed on ritual platforms, decorated with intricate carvings and surrounded by offerings, proof of ceremonies meant to honor the spirit within. The Ainu didn't just hunt bears, they communed with them. Before a bear was taken, there were days of prayer, of explaining to the creature why its sacrifice was necessary. After the hunt, the bones were returned to the forest in a ceremony called Iamonte, a farewell feast where the bear's spirit was sent back to the divine realm with gifts of food and wine. To skip these steps was to invite disaster, as if tearing up a contract with the gods themselves. Some scholars suggest these rituals were more than superstition. They were ecological wisdom in disguise. By treating bears as sacred, the Ainu ensured their hunts were sustainable, never taking more than the land could bear. The curse may have been nature's own retaliation. Overhunt and the forests grow silent. Disrespect the balance and the villages starve, but to the Ainu it was never just about survival. It was a covenant, a reminder that humans are not rulers of this world, but humble guests in a kingdom where every creature carries a spark of the divine. Even today, in the quiet corners of Hokkaido, some say the bear god still watches, and those who listen closely might hear the rustle of his footsteps in the leaves, a warning from a time when the world spoke back. There's a reason the Ainu tell their children not to trust every light they see in the forest. Somewhere between the trees where the fog curls like smoke and the wind hums an eerie tune, the Chironnup waits a fox spirit so cunning, it doesn't just trick the eye, it dances with the mind. Unlike ordinary foxes, this creature isn't bound by flesh and bone. It moves as a flicker of light, a will-o'-the-wisp that lures hunters deeper into the wilderness, only to vanish when they're hopelessly lost. Elders say the Chironnup doesn't do this out of malice, but as a test. Follow it blindly and you'll wander for days, your feet heavy with regret. Respect its game and you might just find your way home with a story to tell. One account from the late 19th century describes a hunter who swore he saw a lantern bobbing between the birches on a moonless night. Thinking it was a lost traveler, he followed, only to realize the light was floating just out of reach, always ahead, never closer. By dawn, he stood at the edge of a cliff he'd never seen before, the fox's laughter echoing in the breeze. Modern Ainu storytellers still recount such tales, warning that the forest has its own rules. Those strange lights, they're not just tricks of the fog. They're the Chironnup's invitation to a game older than the mountains themselves. What makes this legend so haunting is how deeply it's woven into the Ainu understanding of nature's duality. The fox isn't merely a deceiver, it's a teacher. Stray from the path and you'll learn the hard way that the wild demands vigilance, but there's more to it than caution. Some whisper that the Chironnup guards hidden places, sacred groves, forgotten shrines, and those who resist its lure might be rewarded with a glimpse of something extraordinary. To the Ainu, the forest was never just trees and dirt. It was a library of living stories where every creature had a role to play, the fox spirit's dance. That's just one page in a much older book. Even today, hunters in rural Hokkaido speak of cold spots in the woods, patches of air so chill they feel intentional. Others tell of lights that flicker without fire, moving against the wind. Scientists might dismiss these as swamp gas or bioluminescence, but to the Ainu, explanations like that miss the point. The Chironnup isn't about what's physically possible, it's about what the land is trying to say. After all, if a fox can teach you to pay attention, maybe it doesn't matter whether the light was real or not. What matters is that you learn to listen. The night the moon vanished without warning, the Ainu didn't panic. They knew exactly where to look. Legend claims the disappearance wasn't an accident, but the work of a cosmic whale, a being so vast its shadow could blot out the stars. When it swallowed the moon whole, the world didn't just darken, it held its breath. Fishermen's boats rocked on suddenly ink-black waves. Birds, confused by the false midnight, fell silent. And in the villages, the shamans already stood ready, their voices rising in a song older than memory. This wasn't just a story to explain eclipses. To the Ainu, the whale and the moon were locked in eternal dance. The whale, a Rapun Kamuy or sea deity, wasn't evil, it was a force of nature, as restless and unpredictable as the ocean itself. Swallowing the moon wasn't theft, it was a reminder. A reminder that light is borrowed, not owned, and so the shamans sang, not commands but pleas, weaving gratitude and promises into their melodies. Return what you've borrowed, they chanted, offering gifts of dried salmon and woven kelp belts. Hours later, when the moon slid back into the sky, glistening as if newly washed, the people understood. Even the gods must honor reciprocity. The symbols of this legend linger in Ainu artistry. Look closely at traditional embroidery, and you'll find moons cradled in crescent-shaped boats, a nod to the whale's curved jaw. Patterns on ceremonial robes mimic the ripple of waves beneath a moonlit sky, a visual prayer for balance. Even today, some elders teach that lunar eclipses are moments of cosmic realignment, not mere shadows. The whale is checking on us, they say, to see if we still remember the songs. Scientists might call it folklore, but there's startling wisdom beneath the metaphor. The Ainu didn't just fear eclipses, they ritualized them, turning celestial chaos into ceremony. While other cultures banged pots to scare away monsters, the Ainu responded with music and offerings, treating the universe not as an adversary, but as a neighbor who sometimes borrows sugar. The moon always returned, not because the whale was defeated, but because the relationship was honored. And perhaps that's the real lesson, not how to conquer darkness, but how to converse with it. High in the jagged peaks of Hokkaido, where the earth itself seems to heave skyward in frozen waves, the Ainu tell of a time when mountains weren't carved by time, but built by hands. Not human hands, though. These slopes were the work of the Kamuy, colossal stone giants who shaped the land like potters at a wheel. With each handful of earth, they molded valleys. With every step, they pressed new ridges into existence. The island's very backbone was their masterpiece, until the day the giants stopped moving. The breaking point came when humans ignored the oldest rule: never take more than the earth can give. In one version of the tale, villagers dug too greedily into a sacred mountainside, unearthing veins of metal without offering prayers or apologies. The ground trembled in protest, and by dawn, the Kamuy stood frozen, their massive bodies hardening into the very rock they once commanded. Today, certain formations are said to bear their likenesses. The towering cliffs of Cape Kamuy, that's a slumped giant, his face forever turned toward the sea. The peculiar boulders dotting the Chironnup Peninsula, fingers half-curled as if caught mid-gesture. Geologists might point to volcanic activity or glacial shifts, but the Ainu see intention in these shapes. The legend isn't just about punishment, it's a map of consequences. Those stone giants serve as eternal reminders. The land isn't passive, it responds. Modern hikers sometimes leave small offerings at peculiar rock formations, a few grains of rice, a strip of cloth, just as their ancestors did, not out of fear but respect. Because somewhere beneath the moss and millennia, the Kamuy might still be listening. What's chilling is how the tale mirrors real ecological truths. Overharvest metal ore without care, and the earth does retaliate through erosion, landslides, poisoned streams. The Ainu wrapped this lesson in myth, but the warning is starkly practical. Even now, when mist settles heavily around certain peaks, elders say it's the giants sighing. Their message hasn't changed: build with the land, not against it, or one day you too might find yourself part of the stone. Somewhere in the howling white heart of a blizzard, she waits Yukiana, the snow woman, her form woven from wind and ice. The Ainu say she doesn't haunt the winter, she is winter, a spirit who steps into our world when the snow falls thick enough to erase horizons. To the unprepared, she's a phantom of frostbite and fear, her touch colder than the deepest river in January. But to those who know the old stories, she's something far more complex, not just a specter, but a teacher wrapped in glacial silence. The legend varies from village to village, but the bones remain the same. A traveler lost in a storm spots a figure ahead, a woman in tattered white robes, her hair streaming like fresh snowfall. Sometimes she stumbles, coughing weakly. Other times she simply stands, her eyes reflecting the storm. The test begins here. Offer her your cloak, your last strip of dried venison, a sip of warming sake, and she might vanish without a word, leaving behind a path through the snow as straight as an arrow. Turn away, though, and the blizzard swallows you whole. Shamans whisper that those lost to Yukiana aren't killed. They're absorbed, their breath becoming just another gust in her endless winter. What makes this tale so chilling is how it mirrors survival codes etched into Ainu daily life. Winter wasn't just a season, it was a gauntlet: share food or starve alone. Shelter a stranger or find yourself frozen by dawn. Yukiana isn't merely a ghost story, she's the embodiment of that brutal arithmetic. Even her appearance holds clues. Those tattered robes, they're said to mimic the frayed edges of late winter ice, when reserves run thin and patience wears thinner. Curiously, parallels slither through other northern cultures. Japan's Yuki-onna lures men to icy deaths. Siberia's Snegorochka melts with spring's first kiss, but the Ainu version stands apart. their snow woman isn't inherently malicious, she's consequential. Her judgments hinge on actions, not fate. That distinction reveals a cultural fingerprint, morality woven into ecology. A single frozen traveler could doom a whole village if they carried disease or attracted wolves. By turning survival into folklore, the Ainu encoded life-saving pragmatism into something unforgettable. Modern hikers in Hokkaido still report eerie encounters, a whisper in the wind that sounds like a woman's sigh, footprints that vanish mid-stride. Scientists blame hypothermia hallucinations, but elders nod knowingly. Yukiona, they say, never left. She just adapts. Nowadays, she tests those who hike without proper gear or ignore avalanche warnings. The lesson remains the same: respect winter's rules or become one of her stories. And maybe that's the genius of Ainu storytelling. They didn't just scare children into obedience, they sculpted ethics into legends so vivid, so visceral, that centuries later the snow still speaks. Beneath the familiar rivers of Hokkaido, the Ainu believed in another, a hidden current carving its way through darkness where the water didn't reflect light but absorbed it. This was Kamuy, the underworld river, a place where souls didn't drift aimlessly but stood trial before a judge with the head of a salmon and the voice of crashing waves. The fish-headed deity, known as Sepkanto, weighed each life with scales that measured not sin but balance. Had you taken only what you needed from the land? Had you returned gratitude for every gift? The river didn't punish, it revealed. Fail the test and your soul would dissolve into the current, nourishing the roots of the world. Pass and you join the ancestors in a realm where the sun never set, feasting on stories instead of food. This wasn't just a metaphor for morality. Along the Saru River, archaeologists have uncovered burial sites where the dead were laid facing upstream. Their feet pointed toward the mountains, a deliberate alignment mimicking the soul's journey to the underworld. Grave goods often included miniature boats carved from birch bark, some no larger than a palm, as if the living were sending their loved ones off with vessels for that final voyage. But the most telling detail: salmon bones placed in the mouths of the deceased, not as food but as passports. The Ainu believed the fish-headed god would recognize his own kin and grant passage. The parallels to other afterlife myths are striking. The Mesopotamian Huber was a river of souls guarded by scorpion men. Greek folklore spoke of Charon's ferry across the Styx. But here's what sets the Ainu apart: their underworld wasn't a binary of heaven and hell. It was an ecosystem. Souls weren't damned or saved, they recycled. Those who dissolved in the river became part of the earth's renewal, like autumn leaves feeding spring saplings. Modern Ainu elders sometimes murmur that this is why salmon return to their birth rivers. They're carrying fragments of those lost souls home. Funerary customs reinforced this belief. When an Ainu woman wove a traditional Atush robe for burial, she left one thread deliberately loose, so the spirit can unravel itself, they'd say. Mourners avoided saying the dead person's name aloud for a year, not out of fear, but to give them time to navigate the river's twists. Even the placement of graves mattered: always near water, but never where floods might reach. Disturb the dead too soon, and you risked pulling them back before they'd finished their trial. Today, scientists mapping Hokkaido's aquifers have found vast underground waterways, some stretching for miles unseen. Coincidence perhaps, but stand by certain springs at dusk and you might hear something like the echo of a current, slow and deep. The Ainu would nod knowingly. The river never left, we just stopped listening. When the sky split open with a crack so loud it shook the trees, the Ainu didn't cower, they listened. That sound wasn't just noise, it was the wingbeat of Kamuy, the thunderbird, a creature so immense its feathers scraped the clouds. They said each lightning strike was the flash of its golden eyes, each gust of wind the ripple of its talons through the air. But this wasn't just a story to explain storms. The thunderbird was a keeper of order, a divine enforcer who punished oath breakers and lazy hunters with strikes that left the earth smoking. The proof lingers in museum collections today: ceremonial drums adorned with jagged lightning motifs, their surfaces etched with the bird's silhouette. Shamans used these drums not to mimic thunder but to converse with it. During rituals, they'd strike the hides in precise rhythms, a coded language meant to placate the thunderbird. We remember the rules. The beats seemed to say, "Spare us your fire." Some drums even contained tiny metal fragments sewn into the rims, so when shaken, they produced a sound like distant rumbling, a humbling reminder of the bird's proximity. European accounts from the 1800s describe Ainu villages where, after a storm, elders would inspect lightning-struck trees. If the bark split vertically, it was a warning. If it spiraled, that meant the thunderbird had accepted recent offerings. The logic was impeccable. Nature didn't act randomly. Every bolt carried a message. Even now, meteorologists might scoff at the idea of a celestial bird controlling weather, but the Ainu mapped cause and effect onto the storms with eerie precision. Clear-cut too many trees, lightning targeted the barren slopes, pollute a river, thunder shook the valley until someone made amends. What's fascinating is how the legend mirrors real atmospheric science. Thunderbirds appear in indigenous myths worldwide, from North America's plains to Siberia's tundra, but the Ainu version stands apart. Their thunderbird wasn't a mindless force. It was a pedagogue. Modern storm chasers in Hokkaido still joke about Kapap's bad mood when squalls roll in, but beneath the humor lies an old truth: respect the balance or the sky itself will remind you. The drums may be silent now, but the thunderbird's lesson echoes. Some laws are written not in ink, but in fire across the clouds. The river was speaking, not in ripples or currents, but through silver-scaled lips. According to Ainu elders, the day the salmon spoke was the day the village learned to listen. It happened at dusk when an old fisherman waded into the shallows to check his traps. There, thrashing weakly in the last net, was a fish unlike any he'd seen. Its scales glowed faintly, as if dusted with crushed moonlight, and when it opened its mouth, the words that tumbled out weren't bubbles, they were warnings. "The mountain will cough fire," it hissed. "The rivers will forget their courses." Then, just as suddenly, the glow faded and the salmon became ordinary again, except for the mark behind its gills, a spiral raised like a scar, the sign of Kamuy possession. This wasn't just a bizarre one-off event. The Ainu saw animals not as mute beasts but as vessels for divine messages. Bears carried omens, owls whispered secrets, and salmon. Salmon were the perfect intermediaries, creatures who bridged the freshwater and saltwater worlds, dying only to be reborn upstream. When that fish spoke, the elder didn't dismiss it as hallucination. He called a council. Within days, the village evacuated to higher ground, and when the volcano erupted 2 weeks later, burying the riverbank in ash, they understood nature doesn't give warnings lightly. The ecological genius of this belief system lies in its consequences. If a salmon could be a prophet, then overfishing wasn't just wasteful, it was sacrilege. Historical records show Ainu fishing grounds had strict rotation systems, allowing certain streams to rest for years. Traps were woven with gaps too narrow for juvenile fish to enter, ensuring breeding stocks survived. Modern marine biologists would later confirm these practices kept salmon populations stable for centuries. But to the Ainu, it wasn't sustainability, it was etiquette. You wouldn't slaughter a messenger, would you? What's haunting is how contemporary this feels today. In 2021, researchers tracking salmon migrations noticed something eerie. As ocean temperatures rose, some fish began altering their routes not randomly, but toward colder, deeper currents. One scientist joked, "It's like they're trying to tell us something." The Ainu would have nodded grimly. Their legends warned that when animals act out of rhythm, the world is out of balance. That talking salmon wasn't just predicting disaster, it was sounding an alarm we're still learning to hear. Walk the rivers of Hokkaido now, and you'll find subtle nods to this belief. Fishermen sometimes throw the first catch back as an offering, murmuring thanks. Certain stretches of water remain untouched, guarded by wooden totems carved with fish scale patterns. Scientists call these conservation zones, but locals know better. They're not just protecting salmon, they're keeping the lines of communication open, because somewhere beneath those dark, rushing waters, the messengers are still swimming, waiting for us to remember how to listen. In the darkest hollow of Mount Okan, where even the moonlight seems to hesitate, the Ainu whispered of a mirror that didn't reflect faces, it stole them. The witch who guarded it, Yukar Unmat, wasn't born wicked, she was made that way by grief. Legend claims she once wove the most beautiful Atush robes in the land, her fingers spinning nettle fibers into silver. But when her daughter vanished into a blizzard, the witch climbed the mountain's throat and struck a deal with the rocks themselves. They gave her a mirror forged from volcanic glass, its surface black as a starless sky. "Show me my child," she demanded, and the mirror obeyed, but not by reflection. It swallowed souls whole, trapping them in its depths like insects in amber. One by one, villagers who peered into it became hollow-eyed puppets, their voices fading until all that remained was a faint tapping from inside the glass. Archaeologists working near Ainu burial sites have uncovered similar mirrors, not the polished bronze of mainland Japan, but obsidian discs drilled with holes at their centers. These weren't vanity objects, they were ritual tools. Shamans used them not to see themselves, but to see through themselves, holding the mirrors up to catch glimpses of the spirit world during Kamuy ceremonies. The holes, passageways for trapped souls to escape, yet some mirrors show signs of deliberate cracking, as if someone feared what might slip out. Local elders confirm those were the ones used to bind rather than release. The difference between a shaman's mirror and a witch's came down to intent. One was a window, the other a cage. What chills the blood isn't just the legend's supernatural horror, but its psychological acuity. The mountain witch's tragedy mirrors real Ainu taboos around excessive mourning. Grief unchecked could fester into Kamuy, a corrupted spirit that fed on the living. Funeral rites often included breaking the deceased's personal mirrors to prevent their souls from getting trapped. Even the witch's name holds clues. Yukar Mat translates roughly to "woman who sings the old songs too long," a warning against clinging to the past. Modern psychiatrists might call it complicated grief. The Ainu saw it as a literal haunting of the self. The most unsettling discovery came in 2018, when hikers near Okan found a cave strewn with shattered obsidian shards. Among them lay a single intact mirror, its surface etched with a spiral pattern matching the witch's description. Scientists dismissed it as prehistorical tool-making debris, but Ainu activists insisted on reburying the fragments with prayers. Some things, an elder told reporters, aren't meant to be studied under glass. Perhaps that's the real lesson of the legend. Mirrors don't just show us what we've lost, they show us what we might become if we stare too long. And sometimes the only way forward is to let the glass break. When the first winter gripped the land with teeth of ice, the Ainu say a demon emerged from the cracks between worlds, not with claws or fangs, but an offer. It carried a burning branch in its clawed hands, its body casting no shadow of its own. Warmth for a price, it hissed, "Take this fire, but leave me what the flames steal from you." Only when the villagers awoke the next morning did they understand the bargain. Their shadows had vanished, leaving their movements eerily bright under the sun. Worse yet, without shadows, their souls began to fray at the edges like cloth left too long in the wind. The demon hadn't just taken their darkness, it had taken their anchors to the physical world. Panic spread until the village shaman, a woman with ember-scarred hands, intervened. She hadn't accepted the demon's fire. Instead, she'd kindled her own with friction stones, whispering prayers as the sparks caught. "A hearth lit with respect can't be bargained with," she declared. Then she did something reckless. She threw a handful of her own fire into the demon's stolen flames. The two fires twisted together in the air, and with a shriek, the demon's branch crumbled to ash. Slowly, the villagers' shadows seeped back from the edges of the light, thinner at first, then solid as before. But the lesson stuck. From that day forward, no Ainu home ever let its hearth fire die completely. The ritual lives on in the ape Kamuy, the fire goddess who watches over every Ainu household. Even now, when embers burn low at night, elders place fresh twigs atop them, never letting the glow fade entirely. Anthropologists note how Ainu hearths differ from other indigenous fire traditions. Unlike the nomadic Central Asian practice of carrying embers in metal boxes, the Ainu method insists fires must be tended in place, as if anchoring the home to something sacred. The hearth isn't just for cooking, it's a living contract. Let the flames vanish and the demon might return. There's a chilling practicality beneath the myth. Before matches, rekindling a dead fire meant hours of laborious spark striking. A constantly smoldering hearth guaranteed survival during Hokkaido's brutal winters. But the spiritual dimension ran deeper. Fire was the home's pulse. Extinguish it fully, and the house became a corpse. Modern Ainu still practice Ihu Nomi, morning prayers where the first action is feeding the hearth, not with kindling but with words. Thank you for another dawn, they murmur to the flames. It's not superstition, it's memory. Walk into an Ainu home today, and you might spot a metal firekeeper shaped like a coiled serpent, a nod to the demon's true form. The oldest designs have no eyes. Legend claims adding them would invite the creature's gaze back into the world. Scientists might dismiss this as folklore, but neurologists would recognize the instinct. Humans are pattern seekers. A flickering shadow at the edge of a fire pit still triggers primal alertness. The Ainu didn't just tame that fear, they ritualized it. Every tended flame isn't just warmth, it's a whispered conversation with the dark. We remember the price, this light is ours. The first snowfall had just dusted the village when he found her. A woman collapsed by the frozen riverbank, her robe as white as the drifts, her hair streaked with silver like crane feathers caught in dawn light. She gave no name, only a request for shelter. And the lonely woodcarver, whose hands were better at shaping wood than human connections, didn't ask questions. He carried her home, wrapped her in furs, and by spring they were married. For months their life was a quiet harmony. The woman would vanish into their back room each evening, emerging at dawn with bolts of exquisite cloth, fabric so fine it seemed woven from mist itself. Sell these in the market, she'd whisper, but never watch me work. The woodcarver obeyed, his coffers filling with silver, but whispers grew among the neighbors. How could his wife spin such treasures without a loom, without thread? One frigid night, curiosity gnawed through his promise like rot through bark. He pressed his eye to the door's crack, and there she stood, plucking feathers from her own body, weaving them into the cloth with bleeding fingers. Not a woman, a crane. The Ainu tell this story not just as a warning against broken vows, but as a meditation on how greed distorts love. When the woodcarver cried out, his wife didn't rage or weep. She simply looked at him with an ancient sadness, her human form already unraveling. "You saw what I truly was," she said, "and still you let hunger eclipse kindness." By morning, only a single crane feather remained on the loom, its edges frayed as if chewed by frost. Archaeological finds near Koshiro Marsh reveal oddities that echo this tale: centuries-old looms buried with bundles of bird bones, their wings arranged in weaving patterns. Ainu women's graves sometimes contain bone needles alongside crane vertebrae, a silent nod to the blurry line between artisan and magic. But the deeper truth lies in the story's ecological heartbeat. Cranes mate for life. To the Ainu, breaking a promise to one wasn't just betrayal, it was a violation of nature's own vows. Modern ornithologists note how red-crowned cranes in Hokkaido still exhibit peculiar behavior near old Ainu settlements. They'll approach humans, then retreat if eye contact lasts too long, as if remembering some old boundary. Locals call it the crane wife's hesitation. Scientists dismiss it as habituation, but elders murmur otherwise. The cranes aren't just wary, they're waiting. waiting to see if this time humanity might finally learn to look without taking. There are places where the water remembers more than the land. For the Ainu, Lake Kasharo is one such place, its surface calm as polished obsidian, its depths hiding whispers of a city lost to time. They call it Cotton Core, the sunken village, a place said to have slipped beneath the waves in a single night when its people grew arrogant and forgot to thank the Kamuy. But unlike Atlantis, this city wasn't swallowed as punishment. It was set aside, a sanctuary preserved beneath the water, waiting for those worthy to glimpse it. Elders claim the rooftops reappear during solar eclipses, their wooden beams rising just above the surface like the spine of some great submerged beast. Divers have reported eerie phenomena in these waters, strange currents that pull against their gear, shadows too geometric to be natural. In 2012, a team from Hokkaido University deployed sonar near the lake's center and detected anomalies, rectangular formations too precise for random geology. Local fishermen avoid the area, recalling stories of nets snagging on what feels like carved wood before the lines go slack. Most compelling are the Ainu fishing lures recovered from the lake bed, not dropped accidentally, but placed deliberately in clusters as if marking a path. Scientists debate whether these findings point to an actual settlement or glacial oddities, but the Ainu don't need proof. To them, Cotton Core's disappearance wasn't destruction, it was transformation. The eclipse sightings, those are the city breathing, rising briefly to test the modern world. Dive teams occasionally bring up artifacts, a broken clay cup, a rusted knife, but elders warn against taking them. The lake keeps what it keeps, they say. Some secrets aren't meant to be lifted into the light. What's haunting is how the legend mirrors real geological history. Lake Kasharo sits in a volcanic caldera, its contours reshaped by eruptions over millennia. Ainu oral histories describe the night the earth turned to liquid, matching carbon-dated evidence of a catastrophic quake around the 9th century. Modern hydrologists note the lake's methane seeps could create fleeting buoyancy effects, making submerged structures briefly rise, but to dismiss the legend as mere seismology misses the point. The Ainu weren't describing an event, they were preserving a covenant. The next total eclipse over Hokkaido is predicted for 2036. Already, Ainu elders are preparing offerings, hand-stitched tobacco pouches, bundles of dried mugwort to toss into the lake when the moment comes. Not to summon the city, but to acknowledge it, because Cotton Core isn't lost, it's waiting, and maybe that's the most unsettling truth of all, the water remembers. The question is, do we? Before the first thread of morning mist rises from the grass, the Ainu say the spiders are already at work, not just spinning silk, but weaving the very fabric of what's to come. To find a web at dawn, glistening with dew like a net cast across time, wasn't just a sign. It was a map, the pattern of the strands, the way they caught the light, even the creatures trapped in their grasp, all of it held meaning. A web stretched taut between two branches might warn of coming tension. One torn but repaired signaled resilience after hardship, and if you found a web with no spider in sight, that meant change was coming, swift and silent as the eight-legged weaver itself. This wasn't mere superstition. The Ainu saw spiders as the Kamuy of patterns, tiny architects whose creations mirrored the interconnectedness of all things. Shamans would collect webs on birch bark tablets, studying them like sacred texts. The most skilled could read the gaps between threads, interpreting them as turning points in a person's life. One 19th century account describes a healer who predicted a child's illness 3 days in advance by noting how a web center spiraled unusually tight, as if gathering something in, she'd said. When the fever struck, the family wasn't unprepared. They'd already gathered medicinal herbs, trusting the spider's silent prophecy. Modern Ainu textile artists keep this legacy alive in startling ways. Traditional embroidery designs called moru mimic spiderwebs, their geometric precision hiding layers of symbolism. A zigzag stitch isn't just decoration, it represents life's unexpected twists. Loose threads left dangling at the edges, those acknowledge mysteries even the spiders can't unravel. Some artisans go further, incorporating actual spider silk into their work by painstakingly collecting strands from orb weavers. The resulting fabric, lighter than air, is reserved for ceremonial garments, wedding robes, funeral shrouds, moments when destiny hangs heaviest in the balance. Science offers eerie parallels. Researchers recently discovered that spiderwebs vibrate at frequencies corresponding to different types of prey, effectively transmitting information across the silk. Biologists call it vibrational spectroscopy. The Ainu might call it confirmation. Even the way spiders rebuild damaged webs, some species can reconstruct their entire layout from memory, echoes the Ainu belief in fate's resilience. Break one thread and the pattern adapts. Next time you brush aside a cobweb, pause, look closer. Those delicate strands aren't just traps, they're reminders that every choice sends ripples across the web, that destruction and creation are two sides of the same silk, and that some of life's most profound messages come from creatures who speak without voices. The spiders never stopped weaving. The question is, are we still paying attention? High above the earth, nestled in the pockmarked face of the moon, the Ainu saw not a man but a hare. Not just any hare either. This was Chironnup, the lunar hare, whose silhouette wasn't merely a trick of shadow and light, but the outline of a celestial pharmacist at work. According to shamans, Chironnup spent eternity pounding herbs in a mortar crafted from moon rock, blending remedies so potent they could heal wounds with a whisper. But here's the twist. The hare didn't hoard this knowledge. On nights when the moon hung low and heavy, its light dripping like syrup through the trees, Chironnup would toss down strands of silver, threads woven from moonbeams and memory, leading healers to the very plants they needed. The proof lingers in Ainu medicine bundles still preserved today. Peek inside one and you'll find Petacites japonicus, a butterbur plant used to soothe headaches, its broad leaves resembling the hare's ears. Acanthopanax cyadophylloides, a spiky shrub whose roots treat joint pain, grows in clearings where moonlight pools thickest. Even the preparation methods echo the legend. Herbs are never harvested at midday, only at dawn or dusk when the moon's influence lingers. Modern ethnobotanists have catalogued over 200 plants in the Ainu pharmacopoeia, many with verifiable bioactive compounds. But what fascinates researchers isn't just the efficacy, it's the specificity. How did a culture without microscopes know to use Artemisia princeps for stomach ailments when science now confirms its anti-ulcer properties? The Ainu would smile and point skyward. The hare taught us. One particularly chilling account from the late 1800s describes a shaman who, during a smallpox outbreak, dreamt of Chironnup stirring a bubbling paste of makakusu hemp nettle and terep angelica root. Those who received the resulting poultice survived at nearly double the rate of others. Coincidence, perhaps, but when anthropologists compared Ainu herbology with other indigenous systems, they found something peculiar. While most cultures used trial and error, Ainu plant knowledge often arrived fully formed, as if downloaded from some cosmic database. Even the language hints at this. Their word for discovery translates literally as remembering what the moon showed. Today, pharmaceutical companies race to synthesize compounds from Ainu medicinal plants, but elders warn of the hubris in this. Chironnup's gifts weren't just chemical, they were contractual. Harvest a plant without leaving an offering of millet or singing the hare's praise song, and the medicine might turn to poison in your hands. Modern foragers in Hokkaido still follow these rules, tying cloth strips around certain bushes as thanks. Scientists dismiss it as superstition, but the plants themselves seem to agree. Studies show Aralia cordata, a staple of Ainu fever remedies, produces higher concentrations of active alkaloids when grown in traditional moonlit clearings versus commercial farms. Maybe that's the real lesson of the moon hare. Medicine isn't just about molecules, it's about memory. The difference between a weed and a cure might simply be whether you acknowledge the paw prints left in the soil, the ones that glow faintly silver under the right kind of light. Next time you glance at the moon, look closer. That hair isn't just pounding herbs, it's waiting to see if we'll finally look up. And remember, the greatest warriors weren't always the ones who cast the longest shadows. Among the Ainu, whispers tell of a fighter who stepped onto the battlefield stripped of something fundamental. His own darkness. The shadowless warrior, or cage nashi, wasn't born this way. He chose it. In a ritual as brutal as it was sacred, he severed his shadow like a rotting limb, leaving his movements unsettlingly pure under the sun. Without a silhouette to betray him, demons couldn't latch onto his presence. Their claws passed through him like wind through grass, their curses slipping off his shadowless form like water from oiled leather. Examine surviving Ainu armor, and you'll find traces of this legend etched into reality. Breastplates weren't polished to a shine but deliberately dulled, their surfaces matte as charcoal. Helmets bore antler ornaments not just for intimidation, their branching tines fractured light, scattering reflections until the wearer seemed to flicker in and out of focus. Even the patterns stitched into battle coats played tricks on the eye. Zigzag motifs mimicked the jagged edges of a shadow torn away, making it impossible for the enemy to gauge distance or stance. Archaeologists once dismissed these design choices as decorative. Then they noticed something chilling. Armor recovered from sites of legendary battles often lacked one thing: tarnish. As if the metal itself refused to age, the parallels to other cultures are striking. Japanese folklore speaks of nukakubai, headless demons who hunt by tracking shadows. Celtic myths warn of fey creatures stealing shadows to claim souls, but the Ainu twist is darker. Cage Nashi didn't lose his shadow, he sacrificed it. Shamans say the ritual required standing waist-deep in a sacred river at noon, when the sun erased all shadows naturally. As the water swallowed his silhouette, the warrior chanted binding spells, sealing the separation. But here's the catch: without a shadow, he became untethered from time. Seasons slipped past him like leaves down a stream. Children he'd known grew old while his face remained unchanged. Victory came with a price: watching the world age without him. Modern martial artists still debate the practicality. Could disrupting an enemy's perception truly make a fighter invincible? Science offers clues. Studies in cognitive warfare confirm that erratic movement patterns reduce targeting accuracy by over 40%. A fighter without predictable tells, or in this case without the most basic visual anchor, would be exponentially harder to strike. But the legend lingers because it's more than battle tactics. It's a meditation on sacrifice. The Ainu understood that to become something extraordinary, you must surrender something ordinary. Shadows, after all, are the tax we pay for standing in the light. The last reported sighting of a shadowless warrior comes from a 1923 diary entry by a Hokkaido schoolteacher. She described a man standing at the edge of a barley field at midday, his feet planted firmly yet casting no darkness on the soil beneath him. When approached, he vanished, not like a ghost, but like a reflection wiped from glass. Locals knew better than to follow. Some debts last longer than lifetimes, and some victories, they cost more than blood. They cost the very thing that makes you human. When famine clawed at the villages and the last strips of dried salmon grew mold in their hiding places, the Ainu knew to listen for the singing, not from the living but from the bones beneath their feet. The elders spoke of tonkori Kamuy, skulls that hummed when hunger gripped the land, not with human voices, but with a sound like wind through hollow reeds, a vibration that thrummed up through the soil into the soles of bare feet. These weren't ghost stories, they were alarm systems crafted by the dead to protect the living. Burial customs reveal how deeply this belief took root. In the sacred Nusa grounds where ancestors rested, skulls weren't buried facing east like most cultures dictated. They were placed upright in niches carved into the earth, jaws propped open with small pebbles, literal mouthpieces for the spirit song. Excavations near the Saru River uncovered clusters of these skulls arranged in concentric circles, their eye sockets stuffed with dried cypet grass, a plant believed to amplify sound in the spirit world. Most chilling of all, some skulls showed deliberate grooves carved into the teeth, as if tuning them to a specific pitch. Anthropologists argue over whether these marks were ritual or practical, but Ainu elders nod knowingly. The songs were warnings, they say, and warnings must be heard. One account from 1898 describes a village that ignored the humming beneath their winter storehouse. The sound grew louder, more insistent, until the ground itself seemed to vibrate. Days later, a landslide buried their primary fishing river under tons of rock. The surviving families swore they'd heard a melody in the collapse, the same 5-note pattern the shamans had transcribed from skull songs generations earlier. Modern seismologists confirm the area was prone to erosion, but to the Ainu, causation was never the point. The skulls didn't cause disasters, they anticipated them. Their songs were less about prediction than preparation, a reminder that ancestors don't abandon their descendants, even in death. What's haunting is how this legend mirrors real acoustic phenomena. Certain limestone deposits in Hokkaido's burial areas resonate at frequencies between 50 and 100 Hz, the same range as human moans. Wind passing through hollows in the skull's orbital cavities could theoretically produce tonal vibrations. Scientists call it aeolian resonance, the Ainu called it conversation. Even today, farmers in the Hidaka region avoid plowing certain fields during droughts, fearing they might disturb the singers. Some claim to have pressed their ears to the earth and heard faint, rhythmic pulses, not quite music, but something too structured to be random. The lesson lingers long after the rituals faded. In 2019, a construction crew halted work near an old Ainu cemetery when their machinery emitted an uncanny whine. Geologists found nothing malfunctioning. But when an elder sprinkled tobacco leaves over the site, the sound ceased. Coincidence, perhaps, or perhaps the dead were simply waiting for someone to remember how to listen. After all, a song is just a vibration until someone gives it meaning. And sometimes the most vital warnings don't come from the living. They rise from the bones of those who have already survived catastrophe. Before the steaming waters of Nobaraibtsu or the mist-wrapped pools of Toya, there was only ice, a glacier so vast it scraped the sky. Then the dragon wept. Not the fire-breathing beasts of European lore, but Ru-ung-Ker, the ice dragon, a creature whose scales shimmered like fractured glaciers and whose tears held the power to melt eternity itself. According to Ainu elders, this dragon didn't conquer with flame, it grieved with purpose. When its mate fell in battle against a rival spirit, Ru-ung-Ker's sorrow carved valleys through the frozen earth, its hot tears pooling into the first onsens. To this day, the sulphurous tang in the air near Hokkaido's springs is said to carry the metallic sharpness of those ancient tears. The proof lies in the rocks. Geologists marvel at how Hokkaido's hot springs cluster along fault lines, their mineral content varying wildly from one valley to the next, just as legends describe the dragon's erratic path of mourning. At Josunke, the waters run milky with calcium, said to be where Ru-ung-Ker's tears mixed with crushed pearl shells from its mate's armor. In Shirayoi, the springs bubble with iron, a rust-red testament to the dragon's blood mingling with its grief. Modern spa-goers might scoff at the myth, but they're participating in a ritual older than recorded time. The Ainu didn't just bathe in these waters, they held Kamuy ceremonies at their edges, offering carved willow sticks to appease the dragon's lingering spirit. What's striking is how the legend mirrors both geology and medicine. Volcanologists confirm Hokkaido's springs formed during the last glacial retreat, exactly when oral histories place the dragon's lament. Even the healing properties align. The sulfur springs of Nobaraibtsu treat skin ailments, the bicarbonate waters of Saunkyo soothe muscle pain. Ainu shamans prescribed specific springs for specific illnesses long before science identified their antimicrobial or anti-inflammatory effects. The dragon didn't just make the waters, one elder explained. It coded remedies into them. Today, the tradition survives in subtle ways. At certain onsens, you'll spot small wooden dragons peering from rocky alcoves, modern guardians of the old pack. Visitors still follow the Ainu practice of whispering prayers before entering the water, though many don't know why. The real magic, though, happens when snow falls on the steaming pools. Watch closely, and you might see the flakes dissolve not with a hiss but a sigh. The Ainu would nod knowingly. Ru-ung Kerr isn't gone. It's just sleeping beneath the earth, its breath still warming the tears it shed millennia ago. And perhaps that's the dragon's final lesson, that even the deepest wounds can, in time, become places of healing. The mist doesn't just roll in across Hokkaido's valleys, it breathes. And sometimes, the Ainu say, it breathes back. Among the shifting white curtains, figures dart just beyond sight, small and swift as shadows. These are the Kamuy, the silent children, spirits who never grew old enough to speak but whose presence hums through the fog like a plucked bowstring. Some travelers swear the children saved them, their tiny hands tugging sleeves toward solid ground when blizzards erased all paths. Others tell darker tales of being led in circles until their feet froze blue, or of waking to find small, icy fingerprints circling their throats. Whether saviors or tricksters, one truth binds these stories. The children always appear to those on the cusp of change, as if adolescence itself were a kind of mist that spirits could slip through. Archaeologists have uncovered clues to this belief in ancient Ainu settlements. Near sacred groves, they've found miniature wooden sandals, some no larger than a thumb, buried alongside bundles of wild mint, a plant believed to purify the threshold between worlds. Even more telling are the Inor, ritual wood shavings carved with childlike faces, left at crossroads where mist gathers thickest. These weren't offerings to the spirits, they were maps. The Ainu believed the silent children could only guide those who acknowledged them first, a pact sealed by placing the Inor where a living child might stumble upon them. Coming-of-age rituals reveal how deeply this fear and reverence for the unseen young shaped Ainu culture. When a girl bled for the first time or a boy's voice cracked, elders would paint their eyelids with soot to keep the mist from sticking. For 7 nights, the adolescents slept with their hands bound in red-dyed nettle fiber, a color the spirits supposedly couldn't perceive. Most haunting was the chipe sank, the whispering test. Blindfolded and led into the forest at dawn, the youth had to identify sounds: a snapping twig, a distant bird call, while elders listened for something else. The faint, rhythmic pattering of small bare feet that meant the silent children were near. Pass the test and you proved you could discern spirit from wind. Fail, and the ritual knives came out, slicing your hair short as a warning to the spirits that you weren't ready to be taken. Modern hikers sometimes report eerie echoes in the fog, laughter with no source or tiny shadows that flit just beyond tree lines. Park rangers blame mountain echo effects, but the Ainu know better. The children aren't ghosts of the dead, they say, but guardians of the thresholds between seasons, between childhood and adulthood. Their tests aren't cruel, they're necessary. After all, how can you navigate life's greater mists if you can't tell the difference between a helping hand and a haunting? The next time fog swallows a path hole, listen closely. The silence itself might be speaking, and the choice to follow or run could rewrite your story forever. When the winter solstice sun dips low enough to skim the horizon, something stirs beneath the frozen shores of Hokkaido, not a creature, but an architecture. The Ainu speak of Rapun Kamuy no Shike, the whalebone gateway, an archway of bleached ribs jutting from coastal cliffs like the jaws of some colossal leviathan. This wasn't just a poetic landmark, it was a celestial clock. Elders claimed the gateway aligned perfectly with the solstice sun, its shadow stretching inland to point toward sacred hunting grounds. But here's the eerie part: pass through that arch on the right day, and you wouldn't emerge on the same beach. You'd step into the whale's realm, a world where tides flowed backward and the stars swam like silver fish. Whale hunts were never mere food gathering to the Ainu. They were negotiations with the divine. Before setting sail, hunters would carve intricate patterns into wooden ikupasai prayer sticks, offering them to the sea with a precise chant: "Enter through your ribs, return through ours." The phrasing wasn't accidental. Whale bones found at archaeological sites often mirror these carving spiral motifs etched into vertebrae, concentric circles drilled into shoulder blades. Scientists once assumed these were tally marks until an elder pointed out their true purpose: coordinates. Each carving corresponded to a solstice alignment, a way to map the gateway's shifting location as coastlines eroded over centuries. The link between whales and astronomy runs deeper than myth. Ainu star charts painted on stretched sealskin depict Orion not as a hunter but as a great whale, its belt stars marking the solstice gateway's position. Modern researchers comparing these charts to coastal topography made a chilling discovery: several gateway locations align with underwater trenches where whales congregate during migration. Coincidence, maybe, but in 2017, divers exploring a submerged cave near Shiatoko found a series of whale ribs wedged vertically into the seabed, forming a perfect arch. Carbon dating placed them at over 600 years old. Even more unsettling, the cave's entrance faces due southeast, the exact angle of winter solstice sunrise. What chills the bones isn't just the gateway's existence, but its rules. Legends warn that only those who have honored the whale in life may pass through unharmed. A 19th century account tells of a greedy whaler who tried to force his way through the arch during summer solstice. His crew swore the gateway breathed him in, swallowing him whole. 3 days later, his body washed ashore 50 miles north, his skin bleached white as bone, his pockets filled with strange, bioluminescent algae no scientist could identify. The Ainu knew better. The whales hadn't killed him. They'd simply shown him the price of trespassing in their world. Today, solstice gatherings still occur at known gateway sites, though few outsiders recognize the rituals for what they are. Visitors might see elders tossing dried salmon into the surf or hanging braided kelp from cliffside rocks. What they're really witnessing is maintenance and upkeep of the ancient contract between land and sea, human and leviathan. The gateways may be quieter now, their magic fading like tide marks on sand. But on certain December mornings, when the light hits the waves just right, old fishermen swear they can see the ribs rising again, not from the water, but from the air itself, as if the boundary between worlds was never solid to begin with. Perhaps that's the whale's final lesson. Portals aren't places, they're promises, and some doors only open when you've earned the key. The carver knew the moment he held the wood that it was wrong. Not flawed wrong, the grain twisted in ways no living tree should, the surface cool as a corpse's cheek even in summer heat. Yet he shaped it anyway, hollowing out the eyes first, then the mouth, until what remained wasn't just a mask, it was a vacancy. The Ainu called it Sopa on Kamuy, the face thief, a mask that didn't hide identities but consumed them. Wear it once and your laughter would sound borrowed. Wear it twice and your own mother might stare through you as if you were glass. Museum collections now hold the few surviving examples, their surfaces etched with patterns that defy categorization. Some bear concentric spirals radiating from the lips, not decorative but functional. Ainu shamans whispered that these grooves trapped fragments of the wearer's voice, siphoned away with every exhale. Others have asymmetrical eye holes, the left always slightly larger, designed to warp perspective until the wearer couldn't tell which world they were seeing. The most chilling specimens, though, show patches of discoloration where cheeks or foreheads would press against the wood, not from age, but from something leaching out through the skin. Conservators report these areas feel inexplicably damp, even after centuries in climate-controlled cases. the taboos around mask-making reveal how deeply the Ainu feared this power. Carvers never worked during the waxing moon when the wood remembers too well. Tools used for sacred masks were buried after 3 uses, their metal blades said to grow brittle from holding too many faces. Most crucially, no mask was ever carved without its opposite, a second blank-faced counterpart called Kamuy, the mirror that reflects nothing. These were hung near doorways as spiritual failsafes. If a wearer felt the mask clinging too tightly, they could stare into the blank visage to remember the shape of their own emptiness. Modern horror films borrow liberally from these legends. The Onryo masks in Ju-on with their hollow eyes and frozen screams, direct descendants of Sapa and Kamuy. Even video games like Fatal Frame incorporate the Ainu belief that photographs could steal souls, a natural extension of masks that devoured identities. But pop culture often misses the nuance. These weren't objects of mindless terror. They were cautionary tales about performance and authenticity. To the Ainu, putting on a face you hadn't earned wasn't just dangerous, it was a kind of self-erasure. Perhaps the most unsettling account comes from a 1952 anthropology journal. A researcher described encountering an elderly Ainu woman in Chironnup who kept a mask that wasn't there, a wooden frame with no center, just empty space outlined by carvings. "It's for the faces we haven't worn yet," she explained. When asked to demonstrate, she held it before her own features, and for one breathless moment, the researcher swore he saw not her wrinkles, but the smooth, unrecognizable face of a stranger staring back. Then the frame lowered and the illusion shattered. The woman simply smiled. "Now you understand. Some masks don't need wood to hold their shape." The lesson lingers in contemporary Ainu artistry. Modern carvers sometimes leave intentional flaws, a knothole where the left ear should be, a crack bisecting the forehead, not as carelessness but as escape routes. A face too perfect becomes a prison. A face with room to breathe, that's not a mask, it's a mirror. And maybe that's the real horror Sapa and Kamuy warned against, not losing yourself to a mask but forgetting you ever had a choice. Deep in the forests of Hokkaido, where the oldest cedar trunks wear moss-like robes, there stood a tree unlike any other. The Ainu called it Chironnup, the bloodwood. Its bark, dark as dried scabs, pulsed with an eerie rhythm when the moon hung full. For generations, villagers left offerings at its base, carved willow sticks, bundles of millet, silent prayers. Then came the winter of starvation, when desperate hands gripped axes and swung. The first cut didn't split wood, it split the air with a scream, not from the lumberjacks. From the tree itself, and where the blade bit, thick crimson sap oozed like an open vein, pooling in the snow with a metallic tang that clung to the back of throats. Forestry taboos born from that day still echo in modern conservation. The Ainu didn't just stop cutting sacred trees, they developed an entire ethic of selective harvesting. Fall a cedar, plant 2 saplings in a ritual circle, their roots braided with strands of the harvester's hair. Take bark for medicine, never more than a hand's width strip, and only from the north face where the sun's touch was gentlest. Elders taught that trees, like people, had Ramat soul stuff, and to steal too much was to risk waking something ancient and hungry. Scientists studying these practices found something startling. The blood was likely Felinus linteus, a rare fungus that produces a dark red liquid when stressed, but the Ainu response revealed deeper wisdom. Their harvesting methods created patchwork forests with varying ages, a natural firebreak system now emulated in modern forestry. Trees left standing near rivers had deeper roots, preventing erosion better than any engineered solution. Even the taboo against cutting during certain moon phases aligns with sap flow patterns. Modern studies confirm trees bleed less when felled during waning moons. The bloodwood's legacy lingers in unexpected places. Japanese logging companies in Hokkaido now employ Ainu consultants to identify sentinel trees, older specimens left standing to nourish the surrounding ecosystem. Climate researchers track these ancient groves as carbon sinks, noting they store 30% more CO2 than managed forests. And in 2019, botanists discovered a cedar near the original Bloodwood's rumored location with a peculiar trait. Its sap, when exposed to air, oxidizes not amber but a deep, unsettling crimson. Coincidence, perhaps, or perhaps the forest remembers what we've tried to forget, that some boundaries weren't meant to be crossed with steel. Next time you walk through a grove, listen closely. The rustle of leaves might just be the wind, or it might be a whisper from the Bloodwood's kin, still waiting to see if we've learned the difference between taking and receiving. After all, every tree is sacred until we prove we no longer believe it is. The night the star fell in love, it didn't streak across the sky, it drifted. Slow as a feather, silent as a held breath, it floated down to a riverbank where a young Ainu woman knelt, washing robes in the moonlight. She didn't scream when the light solidified into a man with eyes like polished obsidian and hair that shimmered like comet dust. She laughed because the Ainu knew something other cultures forgot. Stars weren't just distant fires, they were suitors. This wasn't just poetic whimsy, it was practical astronomy wrapped in myth. The star husband legend encoded celestial navigation techniques still used by Ainu fishermen centuries later. When the woman followed her star lover back to the sky, she left behind a trail of woven grass markers, each knot corresponding to a specific constellation's position during salmon runs. Elders taught that the Pleiades, which the Ainu called Tumuri Sai, Kamuy the fishbone stars, marked her first step skyward. Orion's belt, that was the star husband's canoe, forever anchored in the heavens as a guide. Archaeologists have uncovered star maps carved into driftwood along Hokkaido's coasts, their etched lines matching the legend's narrative. One 19th-century specimen, now in Sapporo's museum, shows Venus connected to Sirius by a dotted pathway, the exact route described in oral histories for navigating fog-bound seas. Modern astrophysicists note these mythic routes align with seasonal asterisms, proving the Ainu didn't just tell stories, they turned the night sky into a celestial roadmap. What's haunting is how the romance is tragic and reinforced real-world survival skills. When the woman grew homesick and returned to Earth, her star husband hurled a thunderbolt that split her shadow from her body, a warning against ignoring celestial signs. Fishermen took this literally. To ignore the star's alignment was to risk becoming as unmoored as the shadowless woman. Even today, elders teach children to find the shadow star, likely Polaris, before setting sail, ensuring they always carry direction home. The legacy lingers in unexpected places. Contemporary Ainu embroiderers weave silver thread into wedding garments in spiral patterns mimicking the star husband's descent. Satellite imagery reveals ancient Ainu villages were laid out to mirror key constellations during solstices. And in 2022, marine archaeologists discovered a 17th-century shipwreck off the Shakotan Peninsula, its hull inscribed with star symbols matching the legend's path. Coincidence, perhaps, or perhaps some love stories aren't just tales, they're maps waiting to be read. Next time you glimpse a shooting star, look closer. That brief glow might not be a burning rock. It might be a reminder that the sky has always been more than empty space. It's a conversation written in light across centuries. And sometimes the most enduring romances aren't between people, but between humanity and the infinite. Beneath the thin crust of Hokkaido's soil, the Ainu believed the earth didn't just shake, it swam. The culprit wasn't tectonic plates, but Namezu Yuke Kamuy, a leviathan catfish so vast its whiskers brushed the roots of mountains. When this creature stirred from slumber, its thrashing tail sent tremors rippling through the land, toppling trees and splitting riverbanks like overripe fruit. But here's where the Ainu legend diverges from mere destruction. This fish wasn't malevolent, it was restless, and the solution wasn't to chain it down, as Japanese myth suggested, but to sing it back to sleep. Along fault lines where earthquakes struck most frequently, archaeologists have uncovered tiny wooden fish effigies. some no larger than a finger, nailed to trees or buried in stone circles. These weren't offerings in the traditional sense. Each one was carved with a unique pattern of grooves along its belly, mimicking the seismic waves the Ainu observed during quakes. Elders would play these effigies like instruments, running sticks along the ridges to produce vibrations believed to counteract the catfish's movements. The logic was breathtakingly precise. If sound could unsettle the earth, perhaps sound could also calm it. Modern seismologists have since confirmed that certain low-frequency tones can reduce friction along fault lines, a phenomenon called acoustic fluidization. The Ainu didn't just imagine this connection, they harnessed it. Japanese folklore tells a different tale. Their Namezu was a mischievous beast pinned beneath the god Kashima's stone. When Kashima faltered, the fish wriggled free, causing disasters. The solution: crush it back into submission. The contrast reveals a cultural chasm. Where the Japanese sought control, the Ainu pursued harmony. Their shrines weren't built to restrain the catfish, but to appease it. Rounded pits lined with river stones, designed to mimic the creature's preferred resting hollows. During the month of cotton core Kamuy, when the earth was thinnest, villagers would gather to toss handfuls of powdered herring bone into these pits, a substance believed to lull the fish into deeper sleep. The bone's high phosphorus content, now known to induce drowsiness in aquatic life, suggests this ritual was more than symbolic. The genius of the Ainu approach lies in its adaptability. After the massive 1855 quake, survivors in one coastal village reported seeing cracks in the earth that breathed like gills. Instead of fleeing, they rebuilt their shrine directly over the fissure, adding a new feature: a ceiling hung with copper bells that chimed with every aftershock. "So the fish knows we hear it," explained the shaman. Contemporary geologists studying the site found the underlying rock unusually stable, possibly due to the shrine's weight redistributing pressure along the fault. Science calls it load balancing. The Ainu called it conversation. Today, echoes of this belief persist in subtle ways. Construction crews working near old shrine sites sometimes report tools vibrating inexplicably before minor tremors. Fishermen still avoid certain deep pools along the Ishikari River, claiming the catfish's children linger there. And in 2018, when a research team submerged hydrophones near a known fault line, they recorded something unsettling: rhythmic pulses at 17 Hz, the exact frequency catfish used to communicate. Coincidence, maybe, or perhaps the Earth has been speaking all along. We're just beginning to relearn its language. When winter tightened its grip on Hokkaido and the world narrowed to the space between falling snowflakes, the Ainu shamans didn't just watch the storm, they listened to it. Every flake carried a message, they claimed, written in a language of branching arms and delicate spines. These weren't random ice crystals, they were Kamuy Karap spirit letters, each pattern a whisper from the unseen world. Elders taught that matching snowflakes to carved symbols on ritual staves could predict everything from salmon runs to sickness brewing in the village. A six-pointed flake with feathered edges meant the bear spirits were hunting. A dense, hexagonal one signaled time to store extra firewood. But the real magic lay in the shaman's ability to read what science wouldn't confirm for centuries: that no two flakes were ever truly alike. The tools of this craft survive in museum collections today: slender wooden tablets called shintoko, their surfaces etched with intricate geometric patterns that mirror snowflake structures under magnification. At first glance, they resemble abstract art, but placed beside microphotographs of ice crystals, the correspondences become uncanny. One tablet from the 1870s, now in the Tokyo National Museum, displays a design of nested hexagons with branching arms, an exact match for the dendrite snowflakes that form at precisely -15 degrees Celsius. Another shows hollow columns, a pattern modern meteorologists associate with high-altitude cirrus clouds. The shamans didn't just observe these details, they systematized them, creating what mathematicians now recognize as an early fractal codex. What's startling is how these observations align with cutting-edge science. In 2004, researchers at Hokkaido University analyzed traditional Ainu embroidery motifs and found their complexity scaled according to fractal mathematics, the same recursive patterns governing snowflake formation. The Moru designs on ritual robes with their repeating hexagons and branching lines weren't merely decorative. They were visual translations of nature's algorithms, preserving fluid dynamics principles long before Western science coined the term. Even the shaman's terminology hints at this deeper understanding. Their word for snowflake symmetry, Ushnupuri, translates literally as mountain upon mountain, a poetic nod to self-similarity across scales. The practice wasn't without risk. Legends warn of yuki-obake, snowflake spirits that could curse those who misinterpreted their shapes. One account tells of a shaman who misread a cluster of needle-like crystals as a sign of abundant game. When the hunting party returned empty-handed, their footprints in the snow revealed an eerie detail. Each depression bore the same six-pointed star pattern as the misread flakes, as if the land itself were mocking their error. Modern psychologists might call this confirmation bias. The Ainu saw it as cosmic correction. Nature's language demanded fluency, not guesswork. Today, the legacy of this snowflake dialect lingers in unexpected places. Climate scientists collaborating with Ainu elders have documented correlations between traditional predictions and weather anomalies years when unusual crystal formations preceded record thaws or unseasonal freezes. Fashion designers borrow Moru patterns for high-tech winter gear, their fractal geometries proven to trap heat more efficiently than conventional quilting. And in certain remote villages, you might still find elders examining the season's first snowfall with the same sharp-eyed intensity as their ancestors. They're not just watching the weather, they're reading it, because here's the truth buried beneath centuries of folklore. The Ainu didn't invent the snowflake's language. They simply learned its grammar. Every branching arm, every hollow column was a syllable in a conversation that began long before humans walked the earth. The shaman's real gift wasn't divination, it was humility. They understood that to survive winter's silence, you didn't shout over it. You leaned in, listened close, and let the ice teach you how to speak its name. Long before the first outsider set foot on Hokkaido's shores, when the world still spoke in the voices of wind and wolf, the last of the great Kamuy lay dying. Not from violence or age, but from silence, the slow erosion of prayers left unspoken, offerings left unmade. As its breath grew shallow, the god summoned the Ainu elders and delivered not a curse, but a riddle wrapped in prophecy. When the land forgets my name, you will carve it anew. When your children speak in tongues not their own, they will return to mine. And when the world believes us gone, we will rise like fire from ash. Then the Kamuy dissolved into the northern lights, leaving behind not bones, but a single word etched into the ice, Yukar, the name for their epic songs. For generations, this prophecy lay dormant, whispered only in the most sacred ceremonies. Then came the 20th century, when assimilation policies banned Ainu language, severed ties to ancestral lands, and erased cultural practices. The world assumed the prophecy had failed until the ice began to crack. In the 1980s, a handful of elders who'd secretly preserved the Yukar started teaching clandestine language classes in back rooms. By 2008, Ainu was officially recognized as Japan's indigenous language, and in 2019, the Japanese government finally acknowledged the Ainu as a distinct people after centuries of denial. Coincidence? The activists leading this revival think not. Modern efforts carry eerie echoes of the prophecy's imagery. The Ainu language revival program is called Ainu Itak, meaning human speech, a deliberate reclaiming of identity from derogatory terms. School children in Bairotori now learn traditional chants not from textbooks, but from recordings of elders who have since passed, their voices preserved like seeds waiting to sprout. Even the resurgence of Ainu tattooing, once banned as barbaric, mirrors the prophecy's promise of rising from ash. artist Mainkiki, whose intricate facial tattoos made global headlines, describes her work as stitching our stories back into the skin of the living. The most striking fulfillment lies in the land itself. Sacred sites like Nibutani, stripped of their cultural significance for decades, are being repatriated through legal battles led by Ainu activists. Salmon populations, decimated by overfishing, are rebounding thanks to traditional Ainu fishing practices reintroduced by conservationists. Elders speak of dreams where the dying Kamuy returns as a sapling pushing through concrete, its roots rewriting the earth beneath cities built on forgotten shrines. Perhaps the most profound lesson of this legend isn't about predicting the future. It's about creating it. The prophecy never promised rescue, it demanded participation. Every Ainu child learning a forbidden word, every artist reviving a suppressed craft, every protester demanding recognition, they're not just fulfilling the prophecy. They're becoming it, and maybe that's the Kamai's final gift, the understanding that extinction is a story written by others, but revival is a story we write ourselves. The ice that bore the prophecy melted long ago, but the words remain, waiting for the right hands to carve them anew. These 25 legends are more than stories, they're living threads in the tapestry of the Ainu's profound dialogue with the natural world. Each tale, from the shape-shifting fox spirits to the weeping ice dragon, reveals a worldview where rivers speak, mountains breathe, and every creature holds a piece of the divine. What emerges isn't just folklore, but a masterclass in ecological intuition. The Ainu didn't merely survive in Hokkaido's untamed wilderness, they conversed with it, treating the land as a partner rather than a conquest. Their legends codify survival strategies as much as spiritual beliefs, the taboo against overhunting encoded in the bear god's wrath, the sustainable fishing practices hidden within the salmon's prophecies, the earthquake-resistant architecture inspired by the catfish's restlessness. This was a culture that turned observation into reverence and reverence into resilience. Consider the stark contrast to modern environmental crises. Where contemporary society often scrambles for technological fixes to problems of its own making, the Ainu stories offered preventive wisdom. The frozen giants of Shiatoko warned against greed centuries before strip mining ravaged landscapes. The snowflake shamans predicted weather shifts long before climate models existed. Even their ghost stories served a purpose. The silent children taught vigilance in fog. The face thief masks cautioned against cultural erosion. These weren't primitive superstitions, they were sophisticated systems of knowledge preservation, wrapped in narratives so vivid they couldn't be forgotten. The true power of these legends lies in their unbroken relevance. Today, as scientists race to document indigenous ecological knowledge before it vanishes, the Ainu stories offer a blueprint for reconciliation, not just between cultures but between humanity and the planet. Organizations like the Ainu Association of Hokkaido now collaborate with researchers, using traditional tales to locate sacred springs imperiled by development or identify dwindling plant species mentioned in old chants. Young Ainu artists fuse ancestral motifs into manga and hip-hop, proving these stories aren't relics, they're lifelines. When a contemporary shaman sings the whale's solstice song during a protest against offshore drilling, or when elders teach children to read winter storms through the Kamuy Karap snowflake language, the legends cease to be history. They become resistance. Your journey doesn't end here. These 25 whispers from the north are just the beginning, an invitation to listen for the other silenced voices in humanity's chorus. Seek out the Maori's navigational star lore, the Sami's reindeer prophecies, the Haida's tsunami warnings carved into totem poles. Follow Ainu woodcarvers on social media as they resurrect old patterns. Support Indigenous-led land conservancies. Visit Hokkaido's Upapoi National Ainu Museum, but go beyond the exhibits. Attend a live yuka performance. Taste reborn Ainu cuisine. Let the firelight show you how these stories still dance. The Ainu survived attempted erasure because their stories refused to die. Now they're reaching new ears. The question is, will we be listeners or will we become part of the tale's next chapter? The giants are stirring, the whales are watching, and the snowflakes, as always, are still writing their messages across the sky. All we have to do is look up.